Today, we're breaking down what I think is one of the more underutilized aspects of drafting in best ball, and that's having a deeper understanding of your entire player portfolio. We'll break down the weaknesses of raw player exposures, our biggest early flag plants, and I'll reveal just how much of the undoubtedly disappointing Arthur Smith Atlanta Falcons I've drafted so far. You're watching another episode of The Climb. What's up, EJ?
Hey, how's it going? Happy for another episode.
Yeah, it's been almost 2 weeks since we've been able to do one together. How you been?
Good for the most part. Life's about as exciting as it can be, and we're finally finishing up about these 40 puppy drafts that we're in. So
yeah, it's been nice to slowly get out of slow draft hell here over these last couple days.
Yeah, it's been rough. It's been real rough. And I think I still have like 12 left, and some of them aren't even past the 7th yet.
Yeah, it's crazy. I had just a couple days ago, I had some that were only in the 6th round, which is just nuts. So, but yeah, I saw you had the sick draft the other day.
Yeah, that was a little bit of controversy, but I think as a whole, I as long as that one stays on board, I feel real good about that team.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one to watch as the season goes on. So yeah, if you have not had a chance to watch that draft video yet, definitely encourage you to check it out.
Yes.
But yeah, for today, we're going to talk through some stuff with player exposures, why I think they're used incorrectly, I guess is what I would say. So got a couple points that I was going to make here off the top. And first and foremost, like if you are like us and you're already in the best ball streets doing the drafts, depending on what contest you're playing and how much you're entering, you're still probably only about 10 or 20% of the way through draft season. So even though we're going to be taking a look at our exposures now, it's a far cry from where we're going to end up in August.
Absolutely, because I already know that a few of these players, barring I only have a few drafts in this exposure we're going to see here, there's so much that, like, even just looking at this, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to change this. I have people that I'm not even high as when I started all these drafts earlier. So, I mean, a lot changed in a little bit of time.
Yeah. And then I guess kind of getting into the part of having a deeper understanding, like just looking at your player exposures in Underdog isn't going to tell you what ADP you've been drafting that player at. It's not going to tell you what player combinations you have. So like an example that I kind of think of, like spoiler alert, I've been taking a lot of Kyle Pitts, but let's say like of my Kyle Pitts teams, what if 50% of those have been paired with Justin Fields? Like if I'm not drafting Justin Fields on 50% of my lineups, do I really want to have 50% of all of my Kyle Pitts teams have Justin Fields? It's like that's one thing you got to be conscious of when you're going through these drafts. And then kind of that same situation applies to what type of roster constructions are you doing? So like with Mahomes, are you always pairing him with Kelsey, or are you mixing in some 3 tight end builds with Mahomes? And so that can be difficult to figure out if you're just using Underdog. So Michael Dubner from RotoViz has an exposure tracker spreadsheet, which is free. I'll have the link to it in the description for this video. And Spike Week also offers a premium Draft IQ tool that gives a lot of these details. So I definitely think either one of those are worth checking out if you're trying to be a high volume drafter. And as we go through this video, I used a lot of the data from Dubner's exposure tracker. And so another thing that can influence these exposures is your draft slot. So like, especially if you've only done a few drafts, that can have a big influence on it. Or if you're like me and you've only gotten one number 1 pick through 70 drafts, what the hell, Underdog? It's like they saw me win from the 1 slot last year and said, all right, your time's up. No more 101s for Alex.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, as a result, I have very little Justin Jefferson or Kirk Cousins or TJ Hawkinson at this point, even though I don't want to be out on those guys.
No, definitely. I mean, just on the Hawkinson side, I'm very, very in on him. And as a whole, I haven't had a one spot yet. I think I put in 20 total drafts so far, pushing 20, if not somewhere around that number. But I've close. I think I've had 1-2 slot, and so I haven't even been close to the top in most of my drafts.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if that flips around for us and we're just ripping Justin Jefferson like all through August, or if we've just been doomed to the back half of these draft rooms. So yeah, I guess kind of thinking through those things will help you identify if you are like intentionally being in on a player or out on a player. And I was also going to note here, like when we say overweight, that means you have more than 8% of a player. Underweight is less than 8%, because on average, if you're just taking the top player in the queue in every draft, like you would come out at 8% on every player. And so like this is an example from Dubner's spreadsheet of my exposures. And you can see I've got 1% Justin Jefferson right now. Obviously that's unintentional. Versus like Saquon, I've got 1% on Saquon right now, and that is a little bit more intentional. I like the other guys going around him. So, and obviously, if you just pull up your exposures in Underdog, it's just going to show you the top guys. It won't even list a player if you have 0% of them. So, using a spreadsheet like this will tell you, okay, like Nick Chubb, at least as of the time that I pulled these exposures, I had 0%. Whereas like if I looked in the app, I wouldn't know that. And, it's definitely important to have that in your mind as you're going through these drafts.
It just gives you a better overall awareness of what you want to do going forward, just so you can spread out your stocks of each player essentially.
Yeah. And sometimes you'll end up underweight on a guy just because of like where in the draft you're targeting certain positions. So like the way that I draft, when I get into like the pick 100 to pick 120 range, that's usually where I'm trying to catch up at running back, because I don't like the receivers there. And so I've been drafting wide receivers earlier than that. But as a result, I have very little David Njoku or Pat Freiermuth, even though I'm perfectly fine drafting those guys. So these are all things that I'm trying to think through in terms of exposures. And so finally, when we get to August, everyone's going to start posting their exposures on Twitter and trying to show them off basically. But it's important to understand that these aren't created equal. ADP value plays a huge, huge role in whether or not you actually have value on a player. So like this is an example I threw in here that could easily have played out last summer. Like player 1 has 20% of Trey Lance at pick 100. Player 2 started drafting in August, and they have, 20% Trey Lance 4 rounds earlier. Obviously, player 1 is going to have a much more valuable stance on Trey Lance. So anticipating those ADP changes and getting aggressive on a player before they rise in drafts is just a huge way to gain leverage on the field. And I threw in the example of Madison versus Cook during the Puppy 1. I think this is one that I was really successful in taking advantage of. So we'll see my Madison exposures here and the value I got on him, because I took a lot of him very early when he was around pick 100, and now he's shot up closer to pick 80. Well, now it's flipped, and Cook, who was going near pick 60, has fallen all the way down to around pick 80 in some of my slow drafts that are still going. So now I've got exposure to Cook at a much lower cost than the rest of the field. I've got exposure to Madison at a lower cost than the rest of the field. So regardless of who ends up as the Vikings running back, I feel like I'm in a good spot compared to the field in the Puppy. And then just kind of one final point, like I don't have a strong take on whether or not there's such a thing as having too much of a player. Like I know there's some drafters out there who are really confident in their takes, and they're okay going out and getting 70% of a certain player, like a Gabe Davis. And that's fine. Like you just have to understand the risks that you're taking on. So like the good thing is if you're right, you're going to crush the field during the regular season. The con is you put yourself at risk of higher injuries, or if that guy just falls on his face, now you're screwed. And it's going to force you to be underweight on the other players in that range. So I guess I don't have any like clear takeaway here. It's just understand the risk if you are going to be super overweight on a guy. So that was my long-winded rant on player exposures. But any big takeaways for you in that,
No,
EJ?
just that last little bit. Like, I am one of those guys that's a firm believer of go get your guy, and just even in the draft, like the exposures that we're about to give. And like I said, for me, it's kind of limited because I think this was only 7 finished drafts when we pulled this information. But there's a couple guys that I'm bullish on, and I know the numbers are going to drastically go up once all of our drafts are complete. Maybe not drastically go up, but even just with having a bigger sample size, it's going to kind of even out where I might have 50% of somebody where you would be on the same guy and maybe just have like 10 to 12. So I'm on the end of go get your guy if you like him, hope for the best. And if it doesn't pay you off, then you'll be in an Alberto situation of last year. So
yeah. I guess one thing I forgot to add too with this is like, let's use the example of kind of focusing more on the playoffs now. And let's use the example of Josh Jacobs, who like I was terribly underweight on, so I got burned by him pretty bad in the regular season. But like, let's say you draft 70% of Josh Jacobs and he smashes. The problem is the rest of the field who took Josh Jacobs is also getting through to the playoffs. So now you show up to the playoffs, all your teams have Josh Jacobs, but you're not unique compared to everybody else. So you definitely have other levers you can pull during a draft to build in some uniqueness, but it's something you're gonna have to be more conscious of if you are going overweight on a player. So.
yeah, and I think once all these drafts finish up, we're going to have a video kind of talking about the drafts that we like most and kind of our sleeper teams that have those builds. At least I know the one that I want to talk about is like a spinoff of it has some bigger name players, but it's not the main players from like stronger game stacks, so on and so forth. So kind of that thing, just to give you guys another more visual idea of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, all right, we'll go ahead. We're going to kind of each go through our exposures, a couple of the top highest owned guys at each position. We're not going to talk through all of them because if you watched any of our early episodes, you know we can be a little long-winded sometimes. So we'll just touch on a couple guys, talk through a couple situations we've been trying to exploit during the early stage of drafts, as well as how we're going to play those guys going forward. All right, so we'll start it off with my quarterback exposures here. If you watched our NFC recap show, I said I was scared I was going to end up overweight on the Cardinals, even though I think they're going to be pretty terrible. And here we are with Kyler Murray coming in at number 5 for me at quarterback so far. You'll notice though it's a pretty low percentage, like 11% isn't that overweight compared to the field. And just the numbers we're looking at here, exposures on the left, current ADP, at least as of Tuesday, May 23rd, is in the middle. And then this number on the right is basically the difference between our cost on a player compared to the market. So like this would imply that my average ADP on Kyler is 142, one pick later than the rest of the market. And it's important to understand too that if you're going to be overweight on a player, it's basically hard to have a value on that guy because you're going to have to be taking him ahead of ADP sometimes. So I did have a couple takes specifically for Kyler for kind of why I did end up with him on my top 5 to this point. And ultimately it boils down to the fact that he has a wide range of outcomes, whereas I think some of the other pocket passers that are going in that range, we kind of know what they are. So obviously Kyler has the rushing upside, but the uncertainty around his injury. So I like the path to upside for 3 quarterback builds. And I think when you are doing 3 quarterback builds, you can survive his, potentially missing weeks with the injury. And on the flip side, when you're building around an elite quarterback, a lot of the elite QBs this year have late season buys. So I think that also lends itself to pairing them with Kyler because you're relying on that elite quarterback anyway for a lot of those weeks. You should be able to get by until Kyler comes back later in the season. So I guess those are the cases for. The other thing is there's several guys in the 18th round that you can stack with him because the Cardinals are so cheap. So I don't know if you have any strong take on Kyler.
Yeah, Kyler's like grown on me recently because I guess from what I've heard, it seems like he is likely to be ready by the beginning of the year. From at least that's the last information that I heard. And I mean, like you said, there's nobody better to stack with than an like elite quarterback because you're going to be relying on them so much through the front part of the year, no matter what. And last year, Kyler was probably top 5, top 6 getting drafted. So I mean, if he comes around and he is still moving at a decent, even at 50% of what he was like rushing wise. And it's only going to go up as the year progresses. So I think Kyler probably is one of the more sneaky late round quarterbacks, especially when playoffs come around.
Yeah. And I think he was a 5-6 turn pick last year. And that's before, we see the quarterbacks priced up this year. So I think the downside case, which like mentally I'm kind of preparing for Kyler to miss the first month. And I think the downside case is if the Cardinals come out, say it takes Kyler longer to get back, he has to go on PUP, and they come out and they just stink. I do think there's a chance they shut him down for the year. And so that's the risk with him. Yeah. But I'm willing to take that risk at his cost. So next up, I have CJ Stroud. I made the case for him he's been a faller. That's part of why my ADP value looks bad on him. And I won't reiterate the case because I made it on, I don't know if it was a best ball 15 or a full draft, but I just think he's flat out too cheap in general. So then I've got a couple pocket passers who, if you look at where I've been drafting most of my picks, it kind of lines up with guys like Chris Olave, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. So I think that kind of explains these guys here. I do want to be overweight on Geno this year, though. He is one guy who I want to be in on. And finally, no surprise here, my guy Anthony Richardson still sitting at number 1. His ADP has kind of leveled off for a while there. You couldn't get him unless you were taking him like mid-7th. Now he's consistently going at the 7-8 turn or even into the 8th. So as long as he sits at those prices, I think I'm going to keep adding him in. I still think there's a world where he gets up to, early 7th, mid-6th round pick by August.
Yeah, my only concern with A-Rich is, like I said, we know he's a rookie and we know he's kind of a developmental quarterback to a certain extent, which, I mean, it'll have its pros and cons. Could mean he's going to be afraid to throw the ball. He's going to have the rushing upside. He may show up week 1 and be excellent right off the bat. There's such a wide range for A-Rich, and I was on the train for a while, then I got off it, and now I'm kind of like right in the middle of everything. So I like him, but I don't, and I don't, he's just a scary pick right now in my eyes.
Another thing I've noticed in drafts recently is we are starting to see quarterbacks across the board slide a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to continue, but just something to keep in mind. I think some of these early quarterback exposures are just going to start to look bad in terms of ADP value until things kind of level off. But I'll turn it over to you.
All right, we got Joe Burrow off the board. Number 1 at number 5, simple enough. I mean, dude's elite. I have kind of said in a few of the other episodes, I've seemed to go the either elite quarterback, elite tight end route very, very frequently. So no surprise that Burrow's on the board here.
Yeah, and I think you sent me the draft where you got him, but I don't know if you had him stacked or double stacked, but you got him late 4th, whereas I feel like a lot of people reach for him sometimes.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys I feel like that can fall a little bit more than you, just because he's a pocket passer without the rushing upside. Next, we got Justin Fields. Got to go with a little bit of clarification on this being almost 10 spots ahead of ADP. I did one puppy draft. I went into the mindset of whenever I can get Bijan, I'm going to go ahead and get the Atlanta Chicago stack, and I'm just going to rip it off the board with all the best players. And I also went in with the Vegas Indy on that one, I think was my main two stacks that I really wanted to hit on. So a couple of players from both of those teams, these numbers might look weird, but I mean, once again, no argument with Justin Fields. He's going to be amazing for fantasy. Pat Mahomes, no surprise here. Like I said, elite quarterback. So once again, hard to argue. He's just simply going to put up numbers, pass for 5,000 plus, and who's he going to throw it to? We don't exactly know, but we're hoping for the best that we pick the right guy.
Yeah, I'm noticing a trend here among your top guys.
So Trey Lance is a guy that I've been liking to sprinkle in. It seems like I like a lot of the Washington guys too, where their ADP's at. So the San Francisco game stacks makes sense. And if I get one of the guys early, whether that's Kittle, IU, Debo, even CMC, we know that if CMC can put up pretty big receiving numbers. So I like the idea of them going that route. Trey Lance got the rushing upside. If he's the starter all year, what more can you ask for?
Yeah, I think in some ways, he's like the Kyler pick, where you're basically assuming on the risk that he doesn't play at all. But at this cost, it's hard to argue with.
And same thing, it's mainly 3 quarterback builds that I'm taking Trey Lance.
Yeah, the latest report I saw is it sounds like Purdy's supposed to be ready to throw by training camp, but it's just been so all over the place that I know personally I've been taking a little bit of both.
Yeah, I don't think I've drafted Purdy yet, but I don't have huge investment in Trey Lance yet, so we'll see. And at number 1, Jared Goff. This one has a very simple explanation that we'll get to later, and I like Jared Goff because he throws the ball a lot. And we'll just leave it at that.
Fair enough. All right, so I mentioned it at the top. Madison is probably the best value I've got. I will say, just across the board, running back is the position where I try to exploit the market the most, because I think that's the easiest one to get big swings in ADP. Obviously, you have the situation like the Vikings this year, but also just with injuries, which we can't predict, but they do happen. Like, I think it was during Best Ball Mania 2 a couple summers ago was when Cam Akers got hurt and Darrell Henderson shot up from like a 13th round pick to a 4th round pick. So like things like that are going to happen specifically at running back. So I try to get as much ADP value as I can at this position. But already talked about Madison. You can see I've almost got a round and a half of ADP leverage on the field there. So really happy about that one. Honestly, wish I had a higher percentage than 14%. But Rashad Penny, I talked about in our NFC East show why I like him. But again, kind of just targeting the ambiguous backfields, hoping that somebody breaks out at a reduced cost. But Bijan's the guy that I wanted to talk about most. I'm sitting at 16%, which is extremely high for a guy who's going in the first round to be that overweight on. Part of that is the fact that I keep getting picks in the back half of the first round. But the case that I want to make for Bijan, because I heard you talking bad about my guy during your draft, is basically like it's easy to write him off early in the season because, he's a rookie. Like it's going to take time for him to get worked into the offense. But I'd push back on that and say last year Breece Hall was already a top 5 running back by week 4 or 5 when he got hurt. And Breece was a far lesser prospect than Bijan is. The Falcons have a pretty soft schedule, just facing the NFC South opponents twice. And then, it's been shown time after time that these rookie running backs see a late season boost, which is when we care about their production the most. I mean, you look at Tyler Algier last year, 5th round pick in the NFL draft, ended up being a league winner in this Falcons offense. He certainly played a critical role in carrying my team across the finish line last year. So I've got a water bet proposal for
Oh
you.
boy. All right, let's hear it.
If assuming they're both healthy, so they play all 3 weeks, Bijan outscores Jonathan Taylor in weeks 15 through 17.
I mean, I think I'm probably on board with you on that one.
Okay. Okay.
Let me think of a player. We'll go through my running backs, and by then I'll think of a player that I'd argue that with.
All right. Fair enough. Fair enough. So other guys, I've taken Eli Mitchell in a couple best ball and 15s, talked about him, but the splits for McCaffrey when Mitchell is healthy have not been great. And obviously, McCaffrey has some injury history, so perfectly fine sprinkling in Eli Mitchell. P. Ryan is another guy who I talked about why I don't like him as a pick, but basically, kind of like the Madison situation, I've been hitting him now because I think he's going to rise. I don't think, obviously, the most recent reports on Javonte have been good, but I still think there's a chance Javonte ends up on PUP or misses a couple weeks to start the season. People are going to get scared and start steaming P. Ryan up, probably into the 8th or 9th round. So that's why I've been taking him now. He is a guy who, when he rises, I'm gonna back off and just sit on whatever exposure I have.
And he's shown he could perform quite a bit too when he's been on the field already. So
yep,
hard to argue.
So Warren was another guy who I had some notes on because I just think he's flat out mispriced by the market right now. Mm-hmm. He's a clear number 2 in the Steelers offense that improved their offensive line and could take a step forward in year 2 of Kenny Pickett. Also, Tomlin has a history of using workhorses regardless of talent level when the starter goes down. So if something happened to Najee, I think Warren would step right into the Najee role. And I just think if we look at the draft boards from last summer, like similar handcuff backs to Jaylen Warren, we're going around pick 130. So at pick 150, I just think he's flat out mispriced. And compared to the guys who are going behind him, like Chase Brown or guys even later than that, I think we can clearly say that Warren is the backup, whereas you start to have more questions later than that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And he got worked in quite a bit towards the end of the year even, so.
Yeah. I mean, there's some people who think the gap between Warren and Najee isn't even that big, which I won't quite go that far, but I don't think there needs to be a small gap for Warren to pay off this price. And then finally, the last 2 guys here, I've mentioned that I really like the pocket of running backs at the 2-3 turn. So I've been hitting those guys hard. I don't think I'm going to continue to do so because, like right now, my Devonta Smith and T. Higgins exposures are really low, even though those are 2 guys that I really like. But the reason I've been hitting these 2 running backs so hard is I do think we're going to see them rise up. Like Ramondre in particular over the last week has had Adam Leviton at Establish the Run, Dwayne McFarland at Fantasy Life, and Sam Sherman, who does a lot of best ball content. All 3 of them have been pounding the table for Ramondre. So I think we're going to see him start to go up. And it reminds me of this time last year, we had Saquon and DeAndre Swift going in the early 3rd round, and they both ended up at the 1-2 turn by the end of the summer. I don't think these guys rise quite that much, but I think they rise enough to make them a value at this time of year.
I agree. Plain and simple.
All right, well, flip over to you here. Let me know how many guys you want me to put up.
Yeah, I'm just put up the first 3 total, and I'll just touch on them real quickly. All right, so Roschon Johnson, Chicago's got a very ambiguous backfield right now, so I figured if I'm going to take a shot on somebody, always take a shot on the rookie. It seems like they got the most gas, and like you said, value towards the end of the year tends to shoot up with the rookies. So I'm hoping that they don't rely too much on Deontay Foreman, and we don't even know if Khalil Herbert is the true starter yet, so fingers crossed we'll see how that goes for me. Antonio Gibson, I think he's going to catch a lot of passes. I like him as a stabilizing running back in when I'm going more of like a 6 RB build kind of thing. So that's why I have a lot of Antonio Gibson. Javonte, you touched on it literally right before. He could be ready to start the season. If he is ready to start the season, I think he's had a very, very big value right now. And I think once we start to hear if he's healthy, he's going to shoot up. So that's where my brain goes with that. You can do the next 3.
I'll just add real quick. Like, I am with you on Javonte. I'm not necessarily trying to be overweight on him, but I have been taking him in case that situation does go the way that you described it. I don't want to be completely out on Javonte at these prices.
Yeah, you don't want to miss the party too much.
Yeah.
Jahmyr Gibbs, we've heard only good things about him in all the training camp stuff or preseason, off-season, whatever it's called at this point. Only heard good things about him. Heard that he might be used in the slot. Anytime I'm trying to draft rookies, I definitely want him to have a little bit of pass catching work potentially. So if he's coming out of the slot and just gives them on the field more, good signs. Josh Jacobs was elite last year. My ADP on him is a little skewed because I think I took him at 20 one time because of that stack I spoke of earlier. Jonathan Taylor is a guy that I'm like terrified of, but I think his value is like way lower than what it should be. I feel like he should be going 8, 9 still. I feel like the receiver in the first is going to kind of shift a little bit as the summer goes on. I think the running backs are going to scoop up. Like you said, with the quarterback sliding down, I think it's all going to kind of move a little bit. So I'm trying to get Jonathan Taylor while you can still get him at the end of the first, early second. Number 2, probably my favorite pick still to this day. That's why I'm a little bit higher on him. At that point in the draft, you're taking flyers on most people. And with him, Chase Brown having the possibility of being the starting running back in Cincy, we talked about it in our episode earlier. When we reviewed the AFC, if we hear that Mixon goes out, I mean, he's going to shoot up into the top 100 most likely. So rather risk it now, invest a lot and hope for the best. And at number 1, the scary Jamal Williams. Where the bad ADP falls, if you actually went back and watched my last pre-schedule release draft, I was going to take Javonte, and then I think he came off the board 2 picks before me, and I think my brain was so scattered with trying to talk and all that, I realized I had him in my queue, and I just let him get auto draft. But as I said in the episode where we talked about the Saints and everybody, I was just like, I think Jamal Williams is an awesome guy to start the year, especially if Kamara gets suspended. We expect him to get suspended a couple games. He'll give you that little bit of kind of safety net to let the rookies end up bolstering their stats and getting used to the NFL level.
Yeah, your top 3 are really interesting to me. Taylor is a guy who I've just had a really hard time figuring out. I guess I'm a little worried that he becomes like a very expensive version of J.K. Dobbins in this offense where A-Rich runs a lot, which opens things up for Taylor, but then it takes away all the passing game work that we've come to expect for him. I'm still taking him, but I just he's one of those guys where like I really can't figure out which side to fall on with him.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think Taylor's just kind of the guy. Like I said, I think he'll go up a little bit in ADP through the summer. So I just want to, like you said, kind of touch on the value a little bit now. And then I don't have a whole lot of interest going forward since I know even just in the drafts that I haven't finished, I probably got him in 2 or 3 other ones. So I'll probably have my fill of him. Not that I won't take him going forward, but I just think he's kind of, we know what he can do. And if he does do it, then it's a value at this point. I mean, he could be the number 3 pick in the draft and it would be fine.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think for the New Orleans backfield, I've primarily been taking Kendre Miller, but there's been some bad news recently about his knee, so I'm a little worried that he's going to end up being a faller, at least for a little while, which could help your Jamal Williams shares.
It'll make that -10 look a lot better.
Yeah. All right, we'll keep it moving with my wide receivers. I'll throw several of these guys up here because, like I said, at wide receiver there isn't quite as much in terms of really getting some good values here, but just in terms of how I draft, I really want to have at least 4, if not 5, wide receivers by the time you get through. Really, pick 90 is where it falls off because Zay Flowers has started getting pushed up, and Bateman and Sutton are kind of sitting right there in the low 90s. So like that's kind of the cutoff for me. It's like if I don't have my 5th wide receiver by that point, it means I'm waiting until you get down to the Mingo, the Rashee Rice tier. So that's why a lot of these guys who are going, in the mid 70s and the 80s are going to be high on my exposures. Deontay Johnson in particular is one guy who, like, I'm just willing to take a stand on him. I'm drafting him over Pickens at this point and just betting on positive regression for him.
That was the exact point I was about to make. I've been drafting a lot of Deontay Johnson because, like you said, he's right in that pocket before it gets nasty. And it seems like we know targets are an earned stat, and we know that he gets a lot of those. So there's no way he doesn't score more touchdowns than he did last year.
Yeah, we just need a few, and he can be a value at this cost.
Definitely.
So rounding it out, obviously I got Jahan Dotson here in the clip. Same exact thing applies to him. Rashee Rice was the one that I kind of wanted to talk through a little bit more because I actually had a handful of slow drafts finish up today, and he's now tied with Drake London at the top of my exposures, which I never would have guessed that going through these drafts. But the case I'll make for him is obviously Sky Moore was a bust last year, but in a similar setup, he was going at pick 90 all summer last year. And he had more target competition because Juju was there, Mecole Hardman was there. Both of those guys are gone now. So you're getting a guy who has second-round draft capital in Rashee Rice, and he's playing with Patrick Mahomes. And I get that Kelsey's going to be the number one and that they spread the ball around, but like there's a pretty easy path to him smashing at this ADP or for him to rise as people kind of, there's a lot of gross receivers between pick 100 and where Rice is going at pick 130. So I think it's pretty easy for him to get pushed up the board by the end of the summer. So I don't know. That's just kind of my thoughts on Rice. I'd rather take him now than when he does get pushed up to like pick 100 later in the summer.
And I think another point to make with him, no matter what, is there are going to be spike weeks pretty much no matter what. And in a best ball setting, it's not like you're picking who you're starting. So in a best ball setting, he's definitely a good pick.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like for redraft, I'm never going to want to decide between these Chiefs receivers. But even like I like Mingo too, but it's crazy to me that these two are at the same ADP when one's playing with a rookie quarterback and the other is playing with Patrick Mahomes in a wide receiver room where he could step in and pretty easily be the number one.
See, I would argue on the opposite side. I like Mingo more. I've been drafting Mingo more solely for the fact I think there's a more clear path for him to be the one because you got 33-year-old, 34-year-old Adam Thielen catching passes, and DJ Chark's the only other competition out there. So it would just be a coin toss between the two in my eyes for them versus the Chiefs receivers. There's about 7 of them that could be the one.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfectly fine argument because I think as you described, like you're talking about Mingo being the true number one of the offense, like that's in his range of outcomes. Whereas like with Rice, we're talking about him being the number one wide receiver, which means he's the number 2 option in the offense. So like that caps his ceiling a little bit.
It still doesn't mean he'll be bad. Like same point I just said about Mahomes. He's on throw for 5,000 yards. If Kelsey gets, 1,400 of that, that's still a lot of yards to go around.
Yeah. And like, not to get too deep into the playoff schedule stuff, but like you have week 16 against the Raiders, and then obviously this week 17 against the Bengals. Like those are both games that could easily be shootouts. So
Definitely.
the other two guys I have a lot of here are Mike Williams and Drake London. I don't know why I can't quit Drake London. Like the talent profile, the efficiency numbers, he's right up there with Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. So I have a ton of London. I have a ton of Pitts. I'm ready to get hurt again. Basically, I just need them to run the ball a little bit less and for the quarterback play to be a little bit better. Um,
30
I think
passes a game.
I know. It's going to be so frustrating, but I just think the path to a really, really high ceiling is there for both those guys. And quite frankly, the fourth round gets kind of gross at wide receiver where there's just a bunch of options. So like you kind of got to pick your guys. Mike Williams and Drake London have been the two guys for me. Like I don't mind Christian Watson, but the fact that he's the most expensive one of that tier seems a little pricey to me.
I agree. I'd been leaning the other way. I think I literally just took him in my first draft 2 days ago. Christian Watson, that is. I've been taking the other guys a lot more.
Yeah. So basically that's just me taking a stand on a pretty flat tier of guys. So we'll get yours up here. You want me to do the first four?
Yeah, that's fine. So same point with Drake London. That was literally where I was thinking. I think one guy that I kind of was standing more on is Lazard because he is in that kind of gross range, ADP wise, and it's hard for me not to pick him just knowing because it's Aaron Rodgers. He followed him. He loves his guys. I have said it all summer long or spring long, whatever season we're in at this point, that he's going to throw to Lazard, and I just don't see a world where Lazard is scoring under 10 points every single week, whether it's 6 for 80 or somewhere in that range. As long as the Jets play at a decent speed with Aaron Rodgers, I just see a very, very good outcome. DPJ is another guy I'll just touch on super quick. We saw him perform a lot towards the end of last year, and I'm just hoping that he's another kind of big play guy that seems like he's going to be like Tyler Lockett of years of old in my eyes going forward. So with a decent quarterback.
I will say on Lazard, he's the type of profile who I would typically be out on, but hearing you talk about him a lot, I have taken him in some drafts. I was looking at his stat line while you were talking about him. So last year in the Packers offense, where you did have Christian Watson emerging, but not quite the level of target competition that he's going to face from Garrett Wilson, but he had over the season, I believe it was something like 6 touchdowns. Yeah, he had 100 targets, 60 receptions, just under 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. Finished as the wide receiver 30 or 35, roughly, depending on the format. He's currently being drafted as the wide receiver 52. So I don't hate it. I guess the downside case is you know what you're getting.
Right.
Like he doesn't have a ceiling case like a Rashee Rice does, but of that tier of guys, like if you really are in rough shape at wide receiver, I think he's worth a click.
And it's a good, easy late round stack that you can know if you're going to get it almost immediately, so you can plan otherwise if it falls through, kind of thing. So that's kind of another reason. So I think I have Aaron Rodgers stacked in 2 or 3 of my drafts with them. So I like him. Like I said, I've always liked him. I was in on him last year, and I think there was just last year was a weird year where Rodgers, I mean, he came off the MVP year and then just didn't perform. So
yeah.
Jamar Chase, I don't know how how he's fallen to me. Apparently, I think I got him at like the 4th spot in one draft or something like that. So that was just nice and pretty. Renfro is my favorite late round guy. You can pretty much get him. Yeah, I mean,
all right. I want to hear the case for this because I don't think I have much Renfro.
I think the ADP might be wrong on because he's like 178.
Yeah, that is wrong. He's 177.
I don't say he's like really, really late. And it's the same argument I've made for Michael Mayer, like over and over again. He could be the 2 in the offense. Jacoby Myers got brought in. I just think he's up. And like I said, I kind of been targeting that Colts Las Vegas game a whole lot, it seems like. So to get somebody that could be the 2 in an offense where they're going to throw a lot of short routes, and we know Hunter Renfrow is a super, super good route runner, he's going to be a very big PPR kind of guy.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I think one reason I've started taking these Vegas wide receivers more, like a Jacoby or a Hunter Renfrow, and granted, I don't have a ton of either. I'll double check my Renfrow exposure real quick since we're talking about him. But I think there is a range of outcomes where Devontae Adams gets traded, and all of a sudden you've got the number 1 guy from an offense, either at around pick 120 in the case of Jacoby or 175 if you take Renfrow. I'm at 1% Renfrow.
Perfect. So I'll carry it for both of us on him.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, like I said, with Mayer. It's just there's so much uncertainty, and with certain late round people, you're kind of taking flyers, and I just see a higher upside in that flyer.
Yep, that's fair.
You can hit the next 2. I don't have much to say on Pittman, if I'm being honest. Just kind of sit, like you said, he's sitting around that 40 ADP, and it's weird. It's a weird range, and I think he's just a guy, like I said, Vegas cold stack that I've gotten a lot of. But so we're going back to me drafting a bunch of Jared Goff. I've been drafting a lot of Jameson Williams, and I don't know if it was because I drank the Kool-Aid after watching all the highlights when we were looking in the rookies with Bryce Young, but I was like, that man is just always open. And I know he's going like right at around pick 100. So it is kind of weird to say that I'm so in on him because we haven't really seen him perform a whole bunch on the field because whether he's been injured, now he's got the 6-game suspension. I just feel like I've taken enough receivers. When I draft him, I plan to take enough receivers to cover till he gets back from that 6-game suspension. We know he'll be fully healthy going into it. He's fast. We know that Detroit throws the ball a whole bunch. And I just see a world, like I said before, it's kind of like a Tyler Lockett of old situation where he could put up massive numbers just on 3 or 4 catches for 2 touchdowns. And that's what after watching the college highlights, I feel like I got infatuated right before the draft season. So I see a lot of points coming from him when he is on the field.
Yeah, I think you've been drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit too much there. The only, and he did flash in his limited amount of time with the Lions last year. So, I don't mind the player per se. I've just been holding off because I do think we're going to see him slide late in the summer, which I must have forgot to update his ADP as well. Because like you said, he's been going around 100, 105. I think when people really start to wrap their heads around the fact that he's going to be out for 6 games, I'm worried that he's going to fall to pick 130. And that's when I'll try to get
I'll draft even more of him.
That's fair. As long as you're comfortable doing that and being really overweight on him, then I think that's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, the way I'm kind of looking at it is we know he can perform. And typically when we draft these rookie receivers, because he's right before, Zay Flowers is going around there. That's a perfect example. Would I rather have him or Zay Flowers? It's a toss-up because Zay Flowers could shine right away. But if not, typically these rookie wide receivers don't flash off week 1, week 2, week 3. So by the time he's actually performing, it's going to be about the same scenario of when they're actually going to be putting points on the board.
Fair enough. All right, we'll keep moving. I'll just pull up all 5 of my guys at tight end. Like you with quarterback, I think I'm typically trying to do either an early tight end, which basically I stretch the definition of elite tight end a little bit when I'm doing these builds. Basically, Waller and Ingram are the last two guys that I would consider like the quote unquote early tight ends.
Hmm.
But yeah, I've got a lot of Kittle and Kyle Pitts, and then among the late round guys, you can see here, like I got a ton of ADP value on Sam Laporta because I was hammering him as soon as contests open. Um, I still do not understand why Michael Meyer is a faller, and he is someone who I've been absolutely hammering anytime he gets around pick 190.
Yeah. I mean,
I,
hard to argue.
and then for Isaiah Likely, I did have some notes on him. He might actually be my favorite late round pick. He had 60 targets last year as a rookie. That alone, just in terms of targets, would put him in low tight end 2 territory. He has contingent upside if Andrews gets hurt. And then just across the board, I know they got Todd Monken coming in, so this maybe isn't perfectly applicable, but Baltimore did rank second in the NFL in targets to tight end last year. So while I think we'll see more 3 wide receiver sets out of them, I don't think Likely's completely going away by any means.
No. I like I said, I think these two rookies in particular, just they have so much upside on being high volume targets in both these offenses. And there's no reason not to draft them at where they're going, because if you get somebody even like Pitts or Kittle, any of the elite tight ends at the very beginning, and you get these guys at the end, even on those down weeks where those elite guys, even if they got hurt, you still have contingent upside with them being guys that fully perform and like level out your team and don't give you the goose eggs on some of your 3 tight end builds.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll flip over to your tight end exposures here because we got a lot of the same names for the most part.
Yeah. So the guy that I'm most bullish on is TJ Hawkinson, and that both him and Laporta, both their exposure rates will definitely go up. It seems like Hawkinson is right in that range, as you talked about it with the wide receivers, where it's gross. That's why I've been drafting so much Hawkinson, because I'm like, well, I don't really like anybody here. I might as well get one of the better tight ends and just roll with it. So that's my stand on Hawkinson, and I'm probably going to end up, by the time all of our drafts finish, I fully expect him to be around 35% of my drafts. The other guys I've kind of just had one-ofs going forward. I had the extreme value on Kyle Pitts and the draft I did. If you guys watched it, you know what I'm talking about. And otherwise, like I said, I've been drafting so much of the elite tight ends because it just seems for me right now that that's the route I'm building around. So going forward, I'll probably do it a little bit less and take more risk on like the rookies and kind of the middle of the road guys. But why not at this point?
Yeah, I think part of the downside to my love of Pitts at his cost is it's reducing the amount of times that I've been taking these other tight ends, because like when a Hawkinson is there, not that I've had many picks around the 4-5 turn anyway, but when he is there, I'm like, oh, well, I can wait and get Kyle Pitts. And then I take Kyle Pitts and Goddard comes around and I want to be in on Goddard, but I already have Kyle Pitts. So I need to be a little bit more selective about when I'm drafting Pitts so I'm not totally missing out on those other guys.
Yeah, I think we have the same syndrome, just different players.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't say tight end's going to be interesting this year, because there could be, in my eyes, there could be a true falter, or we could legitimately have 10 guys that are relevant.
Yeah. How are you? Obviously, you got Kelsey on here right now. In general, how are you thinking about him? Like, are you okay with him as a mid first? Or
Yeah, so initially when I saw the week 17 schedule, I thought a lot, especially in best ball matter, I really thought he was going to raise up. I thought people would be drafting him as early as like 3 or 4 sometimes, just because that's such a juicy stack. And he's actually fallen since then, so much for expert analysis there. But yeah, I mean, I don't remember where he would have ranked off the top of my head. I remember seeing it, but where he would have ranked as just as a receiver across the board versus where he does as tight end. Obviously, he was the tight end one. So, and with pass catchers being more kind of the trend of how people are drafting, I don't think middle of first is too bad. I would try to trend more towards that 8 spot ideally now, just because I know I got him a lot early. Because once again, I drank the Kool-Aid that I convinced myself that he was going to be a higher round pick. But I mean, it's hard to argue still going early as 3 or 4 is not a bad thing. It's a reach, but I don't think it's like terrible.
Yeah, I've had a tough time with him because he's one of those guys where like if you knew that he was going to produce the way that he did last year, he's probably, up at the 3-4 pick, if not pushing Chase, because he was that good as far as helping teams advance last year. It's just the age really is the biggest factor there.
And I've kind of said this on a few different people that I've been super strong on. When it comes to age, until they prove me otherwise, I'm going to be still in on them.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I tend to be more on the other side where I don't want to get caught holding the bag.
Right.
But I have also had to experience Derrick Henry shoving it down my throat every year except for last year. So
Kelsey would have been the wide receiver 6.
Yeah. Okay.
Behind Jefferson, Adams, Tyreek, AJ Brown, and Stephon Diggs. Barely behind those last two. They're at 211 apiece, and Kelsey was at 206.
And part of why I have so much Bijan is because I was taking Bijan over Kelsey. And part of why I was doing that is because I thought early on that Bijan was going to pass Kelsey. Now I'm not so sure. Now that Eckler's back with the Chargers, the couple drafts that I've done since that news came out,
yeah,
Eckler's been going at like pick 8. So we might even see Eckler bump Bijan down a spot or two. So,
which I believe I touched on in the last video.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I've always liked Eckler more solely for the fact, even if he would have got traded to somewhere, I mean, who knows where he would have landed. So it's hard to argue, but we've seen the guy do pretty amazing things. And it's just, and once again, I know Eckler's getting at that age too. In my eyes, it's proven until proven otherwise. I'm just going to stick with it and roll with it, and I'll get burnt.
I think the concern I have with him, even knowing that he was going to be back with the Chargers, is like he's relied so much on high value touches. And like with Kellen Moore coming in, if they start throwing the ball downfield more, if they utilize the backs near the red zone differently, maybe that changes his role. I'm not saying that's a likely scenario, but it at least gives me some pause with like chasing Eckler up the board.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean really the way I look at it is when you're in the first round, barring the first couple picks, you can really take anybody after the first like 5-6 picks. You can shift anybody in a 2-spot range, and that pick is justifiable. So
yeah, and I think across the board, like obviously none of those guys are players that we want to be out on. So like we're going to be taking all of them.
Right.
Well, I did have one last slide, and it's a bit of a look back to our rookie review show, which was almost 3 weeks ago at this point, looking at how those ADPs have changed since then. So a couple of these guys we already talked on, but I thought some of these were interesting. Like I was surprised Bryce Young dropped as much as he did.
Yeah, I don't understand that one at all. It's not like we've had any negative news.
I'm not sure. Like I don't have a ton of him yet, and I think it's just because like lack of pass catchers that go after him. So like by the time I get to Bryce in the draft, if I don't already have Panthers, I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to take Bryce because I don't personally love Hayden Hurst.
No, I don't say he's definitely another guy that you would tag with an elite guy is how I would want to have him. But yeah, I guess that makes sense because even in the draft I did in the last video, I think he fell 11 or 12 spots. I think I got him at 180, so I guess 11 spots past ADP.
Yeah.
And say Chase Brown only up 4. It's going to go up. I'm telling you. I'm
there was
confident in that one.
We had that little window where there was like back-to-back days where little RotoWire blurbs came out, either hyping up Travion Williams or Chris Evans. So I think that's what kept his price in check. The Chris Evans stuff does not concern me at all. Travion is a little bit interesting just because he's been with the team for so long, but yeah,
I think that also says something that he's been with the team for so long and he hasn't done anything. So yeah, that's how I'm looking at it. But really not a lot of like jumps. I mean, Laporta is about the only one, and Addison are probably about the two most major jumps. Otherwise, nothing like too drastic.
Yeah, I know we both like Addison. Do you think he's going to get any higher than this at this point?
If he gets any higher than this, I wouldn't take him a whole lot, truthfully, because it's just the upfront part of the year. I'm always concerned with rookies at the front part of the year. So it's how I want to look at it. I feel like I can get people that can supplement at the beginning of the year and probably have the same amount of performance later in the draft. So this is about as rich as I would get on him.
I think I'm interested to see what happens with his cost and Jackson Smith and Jigba, because when you look at the draft capital, there's really not that much of a difference. And Addison has a clearer path to targets. Both offenses are supposed to be good, but the Vikings have a worse defense. So theoretically more shootouts. I kind of wonder if Addison is anchored a little bit with where he's at right now, because the Hawkinson, Jefferson, Cousins are all going near that turn in the early part of drafts.
All right.
Yeah. So, yeah, just thinking out loud there.
I'll say. I mean, all valid points. Like I said, I don't know. He's going to be a weird guy. I'll say. I think I almost like Quentin Johnston the most out of him, just because we know that the receivers on the team get hurt all the time. Like, I don't know if there was very many games. There might have been 2 or 3 games where both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen played last year.
Yeah, I've been taking a ton of Johnston. I think he was my number 8 highest guy.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some Twitter doctor out there, and it was pure speculation, but there was like rumors going around about Mike Williams needing back surgery back in January, and there hasn't been like any kind of reporting on him since then. So they like brought it back up this week. So I wonder if we're gonna start to see Mike Williams slide a little bit if people get spooked by that, and then that would push Johnston up.
Yeah. Yeah, do you think he would? Yeah, I don't think he would obviously catch Addison, but I think he would get close. Probably close to a full roundup, you'd say, in the 70s.
Yeah, I think that's probably his ceiling, unless we know for a fact that one of those other guys is hurt. Because, like, even Addison right now, you can make the case that he's the 2, whereas Johnston's, looking like the 3. And that's just among the wide receivers. Obviously, you still got Eckler.
Yeah, true. And Mayer fell off the cliff, which still just doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't. I don't get that at all. I honestly have been liking the late tight end more because I like this. It's gross, but I like Taysom Hill for the upside weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got Michael Mayer and Isaiah Likely both going in the 17th and 18th rounds. Like, that's a pretty nice 3 tight end build there.
Yeah, you're not kidding. I don't have that anywhere, but that.
Yeah. So, but any final? Actually, I was gonna ask, like, say, obviously we just got done kind of with this specific draft window of Puppy. Like, let's say a new one opened up, like right now, was going to be open for 2 more weeks. Who do you think would be the guy that you're targeting the most over the next 2 weeks?
Ooh, that's tough. So I definitely would shy more tight end. So I'm trying to think some more of those early. I don't have a lot of Brees Hall, and I think I do want to get more Brees Hall involved. And I kind of like that Cleveland Jets game. I've grown on it a little bit more. Um, Brees is definitely good. Justin Jefferson, since I have zero of him.
Yes.
Um, I don't have a whole lot of Bijan builds either, so probably would go out and try to reach and get those around those game stacks a little bit more. So those are like the big name people.
Yeah, I think one that comes to mind for me that we haven't talked about yet is Mixon.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can take him right now at the 5-6 turn and still build a lineup as if he's like a round 3 running back.
Mm-hmm.
So like you can get some unique teams that way.
Definitely.
And if we get news either way on him, he's a guy who's going to be a big riser or a faller by the end of the summer.
I think somebody I will start taking a lot more of too is like just Dallas as a whole. I think I'm going to get some because that week 17 is going to be juicy. So I think I'm going to try to get a little bit more of like their late round receivers, like get Gallup, get Cooks, even take their tight ends. I don't think I have Dak at all. So I think building around Dallas a little bit more too.
Dak is crazy. Like I've seen drafts where he falls all the way down to the Geno Smith, Jared Goff range. At which point,
Right.
like if I only have one quarterback at that point, I just scoop Dak and hope that I get Gallup
Yeah.
because that just seems too cheap.
Yeah. I mean, that is extreme value at that point because I think he's supposed to, I want to say he's 11 overall right now. So he's falling around 15, 16, 17. That's crazy.
Yeah. All right. Well, we did pretty good on time. Only barely over an hour. Not bad for us. But yeah, just some final housekeeping stuff before we wrap up here. Our plan, kind of going forward, is basically each week we're trying to do one long form episode, maybe one long draft, and then at least one, if not multiple, best ball in 15 videos. So we're planning on doing best ball in 15 probably on Saturday. It'll either
Mhm.
be Poodle 2 if it's still open or a best ball mania draft. But definitely, if you haven't yet, make sure to click subscribe here on our YouTube page. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any strong player takes early on at this point in the season, and leave us a like on the video as well. So, any final thoughts on your end, EJ?
No, I'll say just like I said, stay tuned. We got a lot of exciting stuff coming up, and we look forward to sharing it with you guys and climbing our fantasy ladders out here.
That's right. Well, this has been another episode of The Climb. Take care, everybody, and have a good Memorial Day weekend.